Well, hey there, idiots. Welcome back to Observe. In today's video, we're going to be covering the Murdaugh trial. This is episode 2 of the trial. If you would like to be able to know some of the backstory, things like that, go check out the first episode. That will provide that for you. Let's go ahead and roll the intro, though. Okay, before diving into the content itself, some fun updates for you. Obviously, the channel is looking a little bit different here. There's a facelift happening on the channel. There will be more new, fresh content coming out as well, but we're starting with some of the visuals here, so if you notice some of the differences, that's what's going on. Along with that, I am wearing the Observe Kurt River collaboration shirt. If you haven't heard about that, I am also releasing a video to my Patreon, giving you the backstory of everything that went into the designing of this shirt, and kind of the inspiration behind it as well. That will be coming up this week over on my Patreon, so go ahead and follow the link in the description for that. Any of the proceeds that are made from purchasing this shirt go directly into charity, which the charity that was voted upon and selected by you is the Endometriosis Research Center. So those are my announcements. I'm going to go ahead and now start right into this footage. This will be a number of different highlights that we'll be looking at across the trial. Let's just go ahead and start watching.
The defendant, Richard Alexander Murdaugh, wishes to take the stand. On June 7th, 2021, did you take this gun or any gun like it and shoot your son Paul in the chest in the feed room at your property off Moselle Road?
Something that I want to go ahead and point out is that the person even asking questions right now is aggressive. They've got their eyebrows lowered, drawn together, and you could see very clearly has their fists clenched. This is a passionate thing. So that's an aggressive display from the person asking questions now, so you might expect to see some defensiveness, something along those lines, or perhaps even aggression matched back from Mr. Murdaugh. Let's see how that plays out.
Road.
No, I did not.
Mr. Murdaugh, did you take this?
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause. That was a fairly important question and, in my opinion, a fairly telling response. No, I did not. Grammatically, that still falls in line with, even like I was saying in the prior video to this one, the same style of display that Bill Clinton even did. No, I did not have sex with that woman. This drawn out sentence format, drawing space between the subject and the action being done. But non-verbally speaking as well, if you look and pay attention, he does have a dry swallow, lip compression, and a small nod in there as well. No, I did not. That level of desynchronization is a red flag. It's not necessarily guaranteeing that he's being deceitful in this area, but it is desynchronized. So what we would want to do is keep our eye out for that sort of pattern repeating anywhere else. Does it show up while he's saying an affirmative thing? And if so, why is it desynchronized here? Questions like that would be bubbling up. Let's go ahead and continue watching.
Did you take this gun or any gun like it and blow your son's brains out on June 7th or any day or any time?
No, I did not.
All right, so we're seeing some aggression come into Alec here as he's starting to clench his jaw, and he's still maintaining a micro nod, yes, while saying, no, I did not. And that is still a desynchronized point. That's still a red flag. So we have 2 red flags centered around here. Even, obviously, we know the answer now. The jury found him guilty. At the time that I was researching this, we did not know that. So being able to see this desynchronization coming up, it was a genuine red flag. It's a worrisome point in this testimony that he is displaying a positive affirmation while stating a negative. Let's continue watching to see how that plays out.
Mr. Murdaugh, did you take 300 blackout, such as this, and fire it into your wife Maggie's leg, torso, or any part of her body?
No, I did not.
Did you?
Still, all of these no's have micro shakes, yes, and we're seeing a lot of manipulators being done to the inside of his mouth. These are agitation as well, mixed in with the jaw clenching. He's feeling aggressive, agitated, and desynchronized. This would not be a good sign for Mr. Murdaugh. This is all pointing towards possible deceit, possible desynchronization. So far, we haven't seen anything that's even remotely pushing us towards authenticity here, and plenty of red flags pointing us towards deceit. Let's continue watching.
Shoot a 300 blackout into her head, causing her death.
Mr. Griffin, I didn't shoot my wife or my son anytime. Ever.
Murdaugh, is that you?
So this still has that same verbal patterning similar to Bill Clinton. No, I did not have sex with that woman, drawing space in between the two. And we're still seeing the same micro shake yes. And so these desynchronization points are, as a cluster, as a combination, a very large red flag. This would be something that I would absolutely not have bought into what he was saying there. No, I did not. No, I did not. No, I did not. Nodding the entire time. So seeing that, this is only sowing uncertainty if we were to be walking into this without knowing how this actually wraps up. Let's see how this plays out.
On the kennel video at 8:44 p.m. on June 7th, the night Maggie and Paul were murdered.
It is.
Were you in fact at the kennels at 8:44 p.m. on the night Maggie and Paul were murdered?
I was.
Did you lie to Sled Agent Owen and Deputy Laura Rutland on the night of June 7th and told them that you stayed at the house after dinner?
I did lie to them.
Did you lie to Agent Owen and Agent Croft on the follow-up interview on June 10th that the last time you saw Maggie and Paul was at dinner?
I did lie to them.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say here non-verbally, now we're hearing him say affirmative things, and the head nod has continued. So the one that we saw, the micro shake yes, that was in the desynchronized points earlier, has now carried over into a synchronized point. And these are all truths that he is telling, and it has come out that he was telling truths in this area, and that does still point us towards a level of deceit from the times before. The desynchronization before, with the head shake yes, as opposed to the no, I did not, is a desynchronized point. Here we're seeing it as an authentic reaffirming head nod to go along with the affirming language already being used. So these are two different points. Now we're able to have these two different data points coming in to provide some context for us to work through. And it's really helping us see a picture of Mr. Murdaugh. Many people say that this was a huge mistake for Mr. Murdaugh to be able to take the stand and try to address these questions. And so far from what we're seeing, that's true. This was a huge mistake. Let's continue.
And in the interview of August 11th, did you tell Agent Owen and Agent Croft, did you lie to them by telling them that you were not down at the kennels on that night?
Yes.
Did you get the chicken out of Bubba's mouth?
I did. I took the chicken from Bubba and I put it on top of that.
Now we've seen, this video of Paul with Cash, Rogan's dog. Did you know that was going on? What do you remember about that?
Yeah, I knew Paul was fooling with. When I pulled up on the golf cart, Maggie was standing back, sort of where the driveway would be.
Okay, so something that I'm noticing non-verbally in this part. First, the initial thing that stuck out to me was the pitch change. He went from having a certain level of relaxed tone and pitch while all the other stuff was desynchronized. His pitch was still fairly relaxed. Now it's spiked up. He's now having more strain in his vocal cords. That agitation, that stress and anxiety is a low-level red flag for me. He's also having difficulty speaking. He's having trouble verbally expressing what he wants to be able to tell. And with that in mind, with the pitch change and this verbal discrepancy that we're seeing, that does also still push me towards there's a red flag in this area. This incident that he's talking about, something is up with. There's too many red flags pointing towards suspicion rather than authenticity. So I would be keeping this in mind as I continue forward watching this, and let's just continue doing that.
It sort of runs out at the feed room. Storage room's what we call it. It's been called the feed room. But it sort of ran out. Maggie was a little bit further up where she could see back in that angle where the dogs were. Paul was fooling with Rogan's dog back towards the kennel. If I remember when I first got there, Paul was more in the driveway, but then I knew Paul was in the kennel fooling with Cash, yes. But did I know what he was doing? I didn't know exactly what he was doing, no.
Okay, now what we're seeing is Mr. Murdaugh realizing that he has just packed an answer with a bunch of extraneous details that don't need to be there. So he's packed this answer. Yes is all he needed to answer. At the very end, he finally came back around and answered it. And you see that he has left this long trail of unneeded extraneous details for this question that had a simple answer. And that does not necessarily mean that he's guaranteed lying. If somebody packs an answer like that, it just can indicate anxiety. Some people just like to pack their answers this way. However, in context with the other red flags that we've already seen centered around this same instance, the same night, the same whole scenario, this would be absolutely seen as a red flag again. So we're just collecting a pile of red flags. None of them are pointing towards anything good for Mr. Murdaugh. Let's continue watching.
The clothes that we saw in that Snapchat video was that the clothes you had at work that day?
Yes, those are the clothes I had on at work that day.
And the jury's seen you in those clothes, and what's on June 7th. How tall were you, and how much did you weigh?
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause before this interesting turn of questions here. That hesitation, yes, those were the clothes I was wearing. He also has a postural change in there. That postural change is another level of anxiety. It can also indicate a shift in the conversation tone or even in roles in that conversation. Regardless, seeing that in there, I feel like there's something around that as well. There's something around the clothing that either doesn't align or it's an important detail that needs to be circled back around and focused on, asked again questions about the clothing specifically, which obviously for those of you who have been keeping up on the case, he did change his clothes. He was wearing different clothes at different times, and there were reasons for that, obviously. And so we're seeing this nonverbal display that kind of hints us towards that regardless. Let's see what happens with that.
On June 7th, well, I'm a hair over 6'4", right at 6'4". On June the 7th, I was about 265 pounds, 264, 265.
And this was in June 7th.
Yes, sir.
When you're outside, riding around and do you get hot and sweaty?
Absolutely. I mean, Paul and I had done some things. We unloaded the bulldozer, cleaned the bulldozer. We'd fooled around. Yeah, I mean, I sweated. I was heavy, and taking prescription pills also makes you sweat worse, or at least taking oxycodone makes you sweat more than you normally do.
So was it unusual for you to take a shower when you got back to the house?
Not at all.
And after you took a shower, what did you change into?
I changed into the clothes that you've seen in this trial, shorts and the shirt. What I asked Blanca about specific.
Okay, so he's having a lot of verbal difficulty keeping up the flow of his words. There's a lot of spaces, a lot of breaks, a lot of hesitations, a lot of pauses. He's also increasing his blinking in there. This is all indicating a lot of extra psychological processing, which would technically make sense in the context of this as he's trying to remember odd details. What were you wearing? What was your weight? On these days, did you sweat a lot? Do you regularly shower? So throughout here, that actually does make some sense to me, and I would consider that to be fairly synchronized. It does make sense that he might shower during that time or regularly shower. At least we're seeing this genuine recollection in areas, means that he's sprinkling in some partial truths in with the actual truth and actual recollection, and that's the indicator of a good liar. However, he's not doing so well. With all of the red flags that have already been displayed, you would almost expect somebody who is as used to being in a courtroom setting like he is to be a little bit better at lying, and he's not that good at lying. Let's continue watching.
Specifically was, did she remember getting my clothes after she came back? When she came back to Moselle, did she remember getting my clothes? It's specifically what I asked her.
I see. And why were you asking her those questions?
Because on August the 11th, they had made an issue about me still wearing those clothes, not having changed clothes when I was in that Snapchat video. So that's why I went to Blanca.
Did they ever ask you on August the 11th whether, they ask you for those clothes? Can you produce the clothes? Did they ask you that?
No, they didn't.
Have they ever asked you for those clothes?
No. As far as my understanding goes, my clothes were never an issue in this case until y'all figured out, as my lawyers figured out, that there was no blood spatter on me. I'm well aware.
Okay. Ooh. So during this time, he's asked the same question a couple different times and a couple different ways, and he has difficulty each time responding to the question. And it's all centered around these clothes, and he's also starting to pull out some of these other gestures that are more specific. You could see this one. This is a classic finger-pointing gesture that is now, it's trained back down. People will use this gesture if they're not wanting to come across as demeaning, which he does later on start to use the finger-pointing gesture itself when talking about his own lawyers, which then that's a level of aggression and frustration directed at his own lawyers, which is fascinating to me. Seems as though there might be some... what's the word that I'm looking for? Oh my God. Conflict? Yeah. Seems as though there might be some conflict within the defense team themselves, which is a fascinating thing to be able to point out. We saw something similar to that even in the Casey Anthony trial, where nobody was really agreeing with anybody else, even though it was all for the same defense team. So we're seeing some possible conflict pop up here. Let's continue watching.
Where that my clothes never became an issue in this case until my lawyers proved that this blood spatter that they said I had on my shirt from my wife and my son was a lie, and that there was no blood on my shirt. And once they filed the documents and they proved that that was a lie, all of a sudden the clothes I was wearing back on that day became an issue.
So it seems as though he's just pointing out that, the case developed, more understanding, more information came about, and he's frustrated at some levels of this. We're seeing the manipulators again on the inside of his mouth. We're seeing his eyebrows being drawn together and lowered, all of these different signals that are letting us know that he's feeling agitation and aggression. And he seems to be upset that as information has come out that needs more investigation, needs more questioning, that more questioning and investigation was done. Let's continue watching.
And that's in the weeks leading up to this trial.
Still, the big question is, where is that blue shirt? We still haven't heard. Next, Alec Murdaugh described going back to the house immediately after the visit to the kennels.
Did you go back to the house?
I went straight back to the house, to the air conditioner.
And what'd you do when you got back to the house?
I lay down on the couch.
And then what? Well, was TV on when you went back?
Yeah, the TV never got cut off.
So you went back to the house, you lay down on the couch, and then what happened next?
I'm not positive I dozed off for a minute or didn't doze off for a minute, but I got up off of the couch, and I made up my mind I was going to visit my mom.
Had you spoken to Barbara Mixon earlier in the day?
I did.
And
I talked to Barbara most days. If I didn't see her, I talked to her.
did you see them on the ground when you're pulling up in your Suburban?
I did.
And what?
Okay, so we see a really hard crash from no emotion to a very heavy display of emotion. So that hard crash is, at least to me, a red flag. It doesn't have a normal onset of an emotional display where you see the emotion develop and come to fruition. It just kind of falls out onto his face. That lets me know that at some level it could be forced. It could be faked. And maybe there is still a level of sadness around it. The quick onset of this emotion is a red flag to me. And it just at least pushing me towards the feeling that he's falsifying it on some level rather than actually displaying his genuine emotion. But let's see how that plays out.
And what'd you do when you came to a stop, Alec?
I think I jumped out of my car. I'm not exactly sure what I did, but no, I got out of my car. I know I ran back to my car, called 911. I called 911. I was on the phone with 911, and I was trying to tend to Pawpaw. I was trying to tend to Maggie. And I just went back and forth between them.
Were you going to Paul and Maggie while you were on the phone with the 911 operators?
Yes. Yes.
And a little bit. I'm going to play the 911 tape, but I just want to ask you, and you've told law enforcement that's been played here in the court. What did you do when you went up to Paul at some point in time?
Okay, so during this time, what I do find fascinating, and we might be able to hear the actual audio recording of the 911 call, is during the 911 call, his signals of distress felt very repetitive to me. While listening to it, it didn't sound as if somebody was processing an emotion. It felt like they were trying to push an emotion out, to force an emotion. And the one that's being displayed here does not line up with the emotion that was being displayed on the phone call either. So what I'm also noticing is that when asked about what did you do in regards to your son and wife, what he regularly does is break eye contact and look down. This could be from sadness. However, this is also a common indicator of shame and or guilt. So seeing that pop out there is fascinating to me as well. So keeping all of these different things that have been popping up at different times throughout this time that he spent on the stand, so far, there have been far more red flags pointing me towards deceit, pointing me towards a level of suspicion in regards to his actions, rather than actually feeling like he is telling the truth and being authentic. Let's go ahead and see how this plays out.
And Paul. Paul was so bad. At some point, I know I tried to check him for a pulse. I know I tried to turn him over.
When you say you tried to turn him over, why were you trying to turn him over?
I don't know. I don't know why I tried to turn him over. Me and my boys laying face down. And he's done the way he's done. His head was the way his head was. I could see his brain laying on the sidewalk. I didn't know what to do. I tried to turn him over. I grabbed him by the belt loop and tried to turn him over. And when I did, his phone popped out. His phone popped out. And I just picked it up and I put it right back there.
Do you have any idea how it popped out?
I know it came out of his pocket when I pulled on his belt loop. When I pulled him to turn him over. And it just popped out. And it popped right beside him. It sat right beside him.
Okay, gonna go ahead and pause here. So during areas of this, it seems as though what I'm seeing is genuine nonverbal communication centered around his reflecting and remembering the instances of this little display here. So as he's talking about these various things, you can see him looking around and trying to recall spatially. He has some certain details that are in there. He also has difficulty remembering certain facets of it. These seem to be lining up. And then along with that, the emotion that's being displayed seems to be fairly synchronized. It seems as though he's actually displaying grief in this area. However, now we're getting around to this area of the phone, and we're starting to pack a lot again. It just popped out, and it was right. It was like it was in his pocket, and then it popped out, and it was just right next to him, and then I put it back in. So he's added so much detail around this instance of the phone that's a red flag now. Before he was recollecting what seemed to be genuinely, now we're getting to this area where it's a spike in his verbal communication, and we're seeing this odd patterning come up, and that would be suspicious. Why is he now adding so much detail centered around this phone? There has to be something centered around that. You need to circle back around, ask more questions, dig a little bit harder at that, because that is suspicious. Let's keep watching.
Were you able to turn Paul at all?
I didn't. I don't know if I was able to. I didn't turn him over, no.
Doing it all? No, I talked to her in person. You talked to her in person? And please We're getting somebody out there to you. Me asking you these questions, don't slow them down, okay? And you sure they're not leaving? Is he moving at all, your son? I know you said that she was shot in the head, but what about your son?
Nobody. They're not. Neither one of them moving.
What is your telephone number?
942-1227. I'm going back to my house just to get a gun just in case. I'm about
Did you go back to the house and get a gun?
I did.
And is
So you can hear the tonal difference between the emergency phone call as opposed to the display that we're seeing here. The display that we had seen before, where I said it felt synchronized, it felt authentic, that he might be showing a level of genuine grief, does not fully line up with what he was displaying just audibly on the actual phone call of the night of. And then that phone call, the repetition in his tone and pitch, the wavering that was in there, it felt forced to me in that it had no dynamic change to it. Even in this, we're seeing some change happen through the emotional displays, but you don't hear that happening on the phone call, which does not necessarily mean that he was being deceitful, but it is something that it feels to me forced on some level, that lack of dynamic in the emotional display in and of itself. That was an aspect that stuck out to me very, very early on in the research for this. Let's continue watching.
this the gun that you got? And how did you load this gun? What did you load it with, if anything?
That was gun, as best I can remember. I believe I got that gun off the pool table where you heard there was some other gun. I think that gun was laying with that pool table. I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure it was on that pool table. That would have been the first place I came to. I know I was grabbing the first gun I could get. I grabbed a handful of shells out of the that I could get my hands on. I know the gun had a shell in it that I loaded, and I know I had a few shells. So,
Okay. Have you seen in this case where there was a 16 gauge shell put in that gun?
I've seen in the records, and I've seen and heard in the testimony that I put a 16 gauge shell in the gun.
Is that a 16 gauge shotgun?
It's not a 16 gauge shotgun. It's a
Why'd you
12
put
gauge.
a 16 gauge shell in it?
I obviously didn't realize what I was doing. I mean, I know you can't put a 16 gauge shell in a 12 gauge gun and not. I mean, I've been hunting my whole life. I know you can't do that. That's not a mistake I would have made. That's not a mistake I'd have made under any circumstances other than that night.
Why did you go back to the house to get a gun?
I just didn't know. I didn't know. I mean, saw it. I don't know. I mean, it's just. I didn't know if somebody was still out there. I don't know. I guess I didn't know.
The jury's heard about.
I don't know answers are difficult to determine the authenticity of. So if it's a solid yes or a solid no answer, and you could see levels of desynchronization, like we saw earlier with perhaps the no shake while saying something affirmative, or a nod yes while saying something negative, something like that can pop up. But with an I don't know, anything that shows up that would be considered desynchronized also lines up with the I don't know. Now, we're also seeing levels of head shakes in there and shrugs in there. So we're seeing the I don't know being reflected in his nonverbal communication as well, along with a lot of lip pursing and lip compressions centered in that entire display. So that area would be difficult. If we were working with just that little thin slice, that would not be something that we could work off of and really pull anything from. However, considering everything else in the context of that night, he seems to have very clear memories of various areas of it. And then there are some of these areas like this that he just has no idea as to why this would have happened the way that it did. All in all, we're seeing, even just in his narrative that's being presented, some levels of desynchronization, even just from the narrative being presented, and all of these earlier red flags. This is a horrible decision for him to have taken the stand like this, just speaking from the nonverbal perspective. Let's continue watching the rest of this.
About testimony of you stealing client funds. Did you do that?
I did.
Did you steal or divert that Ferris fee away from the law firm?
I did.
How did you get in such a financial predicament that led you to steal money that wasn't yours?
No, I'm not quite sure how I let myself get where I got, but it came from, I battled that addiction for so many years. I was spending so much money on pills. I got in a spot I couldn't.
Now, what type of addiction are you referring to?
My addiction is to opiate painkillers,
And when
specifically oxycodone, OxyContin.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and stop it here. These were some of the highlights from that stand time. Now, after watching this and seeing it develop and play out, if I was working with just the footage that we have here and the footage from the previous video, there are enough red flags in this that my level of suspicion would have been high enough to want to revisit and reapproach many, many aspects of what he had said, even just from the desynchronization alone. So sure enough, obviously the jury found him guilty on both counts, and that clarifies a lot of the mystery of the case immediately to be able to have that so solidly and so quickly discovered. But with that in mind, there are other elements to this case that people have brought up. One of them is the testimony of Buster while he is up on the stand as well. If you would like me to be able to take a look at some of the footage that's centered around him, let me know in the comments of this video. If you happen to make it this far, why don't you drop, let's do the justice scales emoji. Drop that in the comments, and then you and I will know that that's what that is there for, and maybe I'll be able to interact with some of the comments that have that in there. So if you have made it this far, drop that emoji in there. But if you would also like to be able to see some more analysis of the footage centered around this case, let me know in the comments below. If you have any other cases that you're interested in me taking a look at, let me know in the comments below. You can reach out to my socials, either myself or somebody on my team will be able to respond to you there. Thank you for watching this video. I'm excited to be able to start getting more content out to you, especially, like I said, some new, fresh, different styles of content that we haven't seen here before. And I'm pretty excited to see how they play out. But without further ado, that's all that I've got for the day. My name is Logan, and you have been oh so awesome as you always are, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.